The Republican congressman who led the charge to oust Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker is now speaking out about that historic vote. Florida Republican Matt Gaetz is standing firm, not surprisingly, in his decision to file the motion to vacate. CBS News Miami investigative reporter Jim DeFede joins us now. Jim, always great to speak with you. And you spoke earlier today with Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, who's at the center of everything that's going on Capitol Hill with his motion to vacate then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Let's listen to what Gaetz had to say to you about his efforts against the former speaker.
Did you have any last conversation with him?
Yeah, I informed the speaker that he needed to come into compliance with the agreement that he made in January, or he would face a motion to vacate. And his response was sort of a profane-laced tirade that wasn't particularly productive.
And do you think he's behind the ethics investigation of you? Do you think they're going to use that, weaponize that against you?
I do believe that Kevin McCarthy tried to signal to the ethics committee that if they turned up the heat on me, that would help him create leverage.
Jim, there's a lot there in the answer from Congressman Gaetz. Briefly, help us understand what exactly he's talking about. An ongoing ethics investigation about his conduct in Florida. What is he talking about, and why is he so frustrated with Kevin McCarthy?
So, as you may remember, Matt Gaetz was also under an FBI investigation for some time with allegations related to his relationship to a woman and whether or not she was under 18 at the time. No charges have ever been brought. As he says, as he told me, he's one of the most investigated members of Congress that there are. And so now, the ethics investigation, which had been on hold while the formal criminal investigation by DOJ took place, now that that's over, the ethics investigation has been renewed. And, he believes that there's been some signaling to the committee that basically they can use this as a way to kick him out of the conference and potentially kick him out of Congress if the ethics commission or the ethics committee comes back and finds against him in some way.
Does he have any evidence that he's shared publicly about that insinuation or suggestion?
No, he has not. He did not at least provide any to me.
But it does seem like this is deeply personal for Congressman Gaetz as he works against McCarthy and his allies.
Well, that's, and that was one of the questions that I asked him is that, Kevin McCarthy has made no secret of the fact that he says that he believes that Matt Gaetz's attack on him was entirely personal, that it didn't have to do with policy disputes, but rather was just an animus that he holds towards McCarthy. And so I asked, Matt Gaetz whether or not that was the case, and he denied it. He said it's purely about the policy differences between the two of them. Of course, there's some irony that he had to align with Democrats to get him out.
Speaking of that, whether it's personal or political or a little bit of both, to get McCarthy out of the speakership, Democrats did join with those Republican rebels who went against McCarthy. You spoke to Congressman Gaetz about that dynamic.
I wasn't working with Democrats. I actually expected them to vote against Kevin McCarthy for free, which it turns out they did. But the yellow brick road of working with Democrats was actually designed, constructed, and paved by Kevin McCarthy.
It's one of the more interesting aspects of it because one of the criticisms that Gaetz has had of McCarthy during the process, particularly the continuing resolution, was that McCarthy needed to turn to Democrats who voted in large numbers for the continuing resolution to keep the government open, whereas majority Republicans did not support that measure. So that was one of his criticisms, was that McCarthy had basically aligned with Democrats. Well, the 8 Republicans, Gaetz and the 7 compatriots of his, had to align with 208 Democrats in order to remove McCarthy as Speaker. I asked him if he found that ironic. He said no. He says he basically never negotiated with Democrats. They just came along for free.
Another figure who's hovering over this entire process is former President Donald Trump, who has worked closely with McCarthy over the years. In fact, Kevin McCarthy once gave then President Trump a whole jar of Starburst candy because he knew Trump liked them so much, and there was a reflection of how cozy they had become as political allies. Gaetz, of course, also a close ally of former President Donald Trump. Let's listen to what Gaetz had to tell you about whether Trump weighed in on his decision to go against McCarthy.
Since you talk to him every day, did you consult with him in advance of making the move to oust the speaker? Did he sign off on that? Did he give you his blessing?
I think his exact words, Jim, were do what you have to do. And that was enough of a blessing for me.
So you see in Gaetz a little bit of a coy answer, a bit of a wink. What role, based on your reporting, do you believe Trump played behind the scenes, Jim?
That is why I wanted to ask the question, in part because, other than I think one post on Truth Social where he talked about how, rather than fighting amongst themselves, they should be focused on the Democrats and the Biden administration. We haven't heard from the former president very much. He's been tied up, obviously, in the New York case that he's dealing with. And so this was at least the beginning of trying to pierce that veil and try to get inside some of those conversations. The fact that this took place just before the vote, the fact that Gaetz did reach out to Trump and tell him that this is what he planned, and you heard what Gaetz claimed the former president said, it's an interesting sort of look. I'm sure we'll hear more from Donald Trump eventually about it. One of the things that Gaetz also told me was that he intends to be on the campaign trail alongside President Trump next week, of course, depending on the vote for Speaker next week. But he's planning on being right along Trump's side, and Trump will see if he'll have him with him.
And we know you'll be on top of all of those things, Jim, as you are nationally and in Florida. Really appreciate you being with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.